Let's Be Friends.
Brandon Marcello, always very gracious whenever I blow up his phone about a segment. We appreciate his time. It's been a busy stretch for him. Brandon, all these media days are now winding down. Was there one or two of anything said or a story from any of the ones that you attended, which I'm sure were quite a bit, that came to mind to you the most?
Not really. It's talking season, and I'm ready for the talking to stop, man. I'm ready to hit into some practices. I want to hear about depth charts, what's going on in those practices, and of course, kick the ball off. You know, I hate to say that, but I'm not a blowhard. You know what I mean? A lot of media go in there and we go, "Wow, this is an interesting story." No, it's not. Everybody's just talking out their ass. Let's get the ball. Let's get the ball kicked off.
God, I love what you just said. That's a great response. Brandon Marcello with his 247 Sports.
Brandon, I see that you've been tweeting a little bit about the House agreement that I guess was filed officially today, and I know that everybody's pouring through and trying to figure out the details of this. My, I guess, just main and perhaps only question on it is, what do you make of the scholarship increases, particularly in football? I don't know quite how to feel about it because I don't quite understand what it's going to look like on the other side, having the additional 20 scholarships. So what are your kind of early thoughts on what exactly this means for football to go from 85 to 105?
Yeah, well, you know, really the bigger thing here to me is that we're shrinking roster sizes for football from, 125 or 130 down to 105. And that, for that matter, schools at their own discretion can provide 105 scholarships, or they could do 20, or they could do 85 like they do now, and then technically still have 20 walk-ons. But the limit's been shrunk. Your roster will be 105, and that's what coaches and administrators are most upset about. It's not necessarily spending more money potentially on up to 105 scholarships. It's eliminating walk-ons and guys that can walk on and be part of the team that are beyond the 105. So to me, what's going to be most interesting is, listen, these schools are all going to have 105 scholarship players. I don't see anybody skimming on that on the Power 5 level. But in talking to administrators this last week, when the numbers started leaking about baseball and softball roster sizes, they're looking at the possibility of funding up to 34 scholarships for baseball instead of the equivalency that used to be 11.7, which they would separate out among like 20-something players. So now they could do up to 34, right? Well, I've talked to some Power 5 administrators that say they're just not going to be able to afford that. They're not going to give 34 scholarships out to baseball. It's going to be lower than that. So what this does is, yes, it increases the possibility for scholarships in all sports, but also these are not going to be full head count scholarships like you see in football now. It's going to be equivalency scholarships. So, for example, if a football program only wants to give out maybe 90 scholarships, right?
Right.
Well, they don't have to give everybody a full scholarship. They can give someone a 40% scholarship ride and then give someone else a 60% scholarship ride. That would help, alleviate some concerns there about having 20-something players as walk-ons. But the long and short of it is, when it comes to football, most, if not all, those Power 5 conference teams are going to end up giving scholarships to all 105 instead of, splitting out a certain number that's lower than that.
And baseball's been splitting out there at 11.7. And they get up to 34 now. But isn't that kind of what baseball has been doing for as long as I can remember?
Yep. But that number, of course, was 11.7, as you mentioned,
right,
which a lot of schools, I know at least in the SEC, they complained a lot about that because they're more than willing to pay for more scholarships because they were kind of an uneven playing field against, believe it or not, Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, because of some academic scholarships and stuff like that, were able to put more players on the baseball team on scholarship. Meanwhile, other schools were not. So Vanderbilt was able to swoop in on some big-time recruits in baseball and steal them away from the likes of LSU or Mississippi State or South Carolina because they were able to give them full scholarships, whereas some of these other schools were limited to 11.7. Well, that's being done away with now, and everybody's going to be kind of on an even playing field. But as I said, not every power program is going to be able to fund 35 scholarships for baseball and also 34 for softball as well.
Yeah, I think it might have been Ross Dellinger put out a chart, and Brandon, they're going from, I think it was in total, if you had every single sport, like 500, and now I'm forgetting 500 something to an additional 700 something, so more than double. And yeah, it's hard to believe that anybody will max out on that, but that's just crazy how much that's going to change things.
Yeah, and remember, not all schools have 20-something athletics programs in their schools, and that's why in a lot of examples, and some of these power administrators saying, you would be smart to be an administrator right now to not go out there and say, hey, we're not going to eliminate any sports. I can promise you that, because they're still crunching these numbers, and they're going to go through this in the next few years. And unless there's some new revenue streams that come up to help alleviate some of these concerns, there's some issues to be worked out there to keep all the sports afloat.
All right, so football and men's basketball are the ones who get the biggest checks from the back pay. Is that right? Is there any question about that? Is it a massive difference?
Yeah, we're looking at what would have been reported. I think it was about 90% of the deal would be going out to football and men's basketball players, and then separate from that was women's basketball with a higher percentage, which I believe is about 5%, and then the rest was kind of differentiated out among the other sports. So a lot of that stuff's going to be kind of in the finer print or whatever, which of course gives a lot of people thoughts of, well, when it comes to the future payments for current athletes, can we follow that structure, that blueprint? Well, that's when Title IX comes in the situation here, and that's all going to have to be hammered out school by school is the belief, not necessarily in a wide-ranging thing from the NCAA level, unless, of course, Congress steps in and is able to codify some of this and say, hey, it's not against Title IX rules, and it's fine if you give, say, 75% of your revenue of this 22% out to football players. But that seems to be a long and far-fetched dream at this point. And in the interim, it certainly looks like this is going to be school-by-school decisions inside their states and according to their state laws.
Brandon, like you said, it's talking season. There have been some, just interesting moments like Deshaun Foster's awkward presser. Lincoln Riley had some things to say that a lot of people went crazy over. What did you think about Jim Phillips and the way he just sort of set the tone at ACC Media Days? And obviously there's still a lot to play out as far as that whole entire story goes. But what did you think? Because it at least seemed to just kind of quiet down the talk, if anything, the following days.
Well, like he said, they're going to fight in court until their last breath against Florida State and Clemson to keep them in that conference. But that doesn't quiet down what's actually happening behind the scenes. And there's been other talk about the Big Ten, the SEC not being interested in Florida State and Clemson. Well, yeah, they're not interested right now because they don't want to get involved in litigation and everything. They want to see how this all gets settled out before they even start thinking about potentially expanding or adding one or both of those programs. So yeah, Jim Phillips, of course, had to come out and be a little bit more aggressive out there. He's been kind of criticized in the past couple of years throughout all of this, throughout expansion and realignment, for kind of being too nice and playing too nice. So he needed to do that. But still, there's turmoil in backstage there. We did a big article earlier this week at the kickoff of ACC Media Days about how there's some strife among administrators and coaches about their media situation in the ACC, and not necessarily how much they're getting paid, but how the ACC is being portrayed in the media, not just on the other networks, but on their own network, the ACC network. They're upset with not having a quote-unquote Paul Feinbaum of their own to kind of a weaponized voice that would protect and kind of portray the ACC as stronger than it is right now. And for that matter, there's conversations about how ESPN covers the ACC. So, for example, Selection Sunday on the college football playoff, they had 11 analysts and hosts on there that had backgrounds in all the other power conferences, but there was missing one voice, the ACC. And meanwhile, they own the ACC network with a bunch of personalities and analysts. They didn't have them on the show. And in fact, one of those analysts was just down the hall in Bristol, Connecticut, while that 2-hour show was on, and they didn't bring him on. So it's a lot of really some concerns there in the ACC, just how ESPN's treating them, and for that matter, how they're being portrayed in the media themselves with their own media partner.
Yeah, no, that is very, very interesting, and I've seen a lot of guys kind of throw. I'll be the Feinbaum of the ACC. Now, but you've grown up around college football, and especially the South, and you've seen kind of how all that works. It's not a simple, like, Feinbaum's just kind of unique in his own right, is he not? Like, I'm not always the biggest fan necessarily, and I do think the propaganda can kind of go overboard, but I don't think you can just say, like, hey, Brandon Marcello, do what Feinbaum does, but for the ACC.
No, you can't. And in fact, if there was another Feinbaum out there, they would have popped up in SEC country because listen, there's no fan bases in the country that are more fervent and crazy than SEC fans. And Paul Feinbaum was in the heart of it and was a well-respected firebomb of a journalist in the state of Alabama as a writer and reporter. And then, of course, as a columnist later and did the radio show. And so there's really no one else out there that would really kind of tap into the formula there in the SEC. And if you're going to try and replicate that in the ACC, do you think, Syracuse football fans are going to get riled up? Do you think a Syracuse football fan is going to go poison Toomer's Oaks at Auburn and then call the radio show and brag about it like Harvey Updike did on Paul Feinbaum's show years ago? It's a much different temperament in the SEC. And for that matter, Paul Feinbaum let the fans speak. He gave them a forum, but also Feinbaum's got a lot of connections throughout the SEC, had his finger on the pulse, and wasn't afraid to kind of, shout from the rooftops things he thought. I mean, he called out coaches all the time in newspaper and in print, and of course continues to do so on the SEC network, which again, the ACC just doesn't allow. They kind of tiptoe the issues there, and that's something that a lot of people think has to change. But for example, we had sources telling us that Dabo Swinney a couple of years ago said, "Hey, we need our own Paul Feinbaum." But my question is do you really, Dabo? Because the last 2-3 years, if you had a Paul Feinbaum on your network,
oh yeah,
they'd be telling you right now that you might be one of the worst coaches in the ACC. You're not adapting to the times in the transfer portal, and that you're past your prime, and it's time to move on from Dabo Swinney. I don't think Dabo would have loved hearing that based off his reactions from the very light criticism he gets from his own ACC media now.
All right, Brandon, want you to have a great weekend. Your story today, Donovan Edwards, his mother, Donna, your thoughts, kind of tell everybody about the story. Here's how it's set up. Before she died, Donna Edwards gave her husband 3 commands as he embarked on becoming a single parent. Take the kids to church, get an education, make the kids play sports. And Donovan Edwards now carrying out his mom's name as the face of Michigan football.
Yeah, Donovan Edwards is a guy that as he even describes, was arrogant, even up to a year ago as a player. Has been a backup, exploded on the scene in the national championship game, as a lot of us saw. And now that Blake Corum's gone and a lot of those starters, 17 starters from that national championship team, he's the guy. He's on the cover of VA Sports College Football, and now he's the face of Michigan football. And he says he's ready to take that on after going through a heck of a lot throughout his childhood, losing his mother, doesn't even remember his mother because he was 2 years old, and being raised in a single-parent home, and his dad in the summer months going to Boston to go to school and allowing the kids have to be raised by his in-laws while he did that, and then would come back during the year and work and continue studying. It's quite the story. And I'll tell you what, Big Ten has some good stories there. You mentioned Deshaun Foster.
Mm-hmm.
When he had his big-time gaffe there, his flub, we followed him around throughout the day after that and kind of peeled back the curtain a little bit on why Deshaun Foster did what he did and what kind of guy he is. Some interesting stuff from him off to the side there. So, yeah, go check all that out. I appreciate it over at cbssports.com.
No, it's a great story. Thank you for your time, Brandon. We appreciate your access when we get it. And always want to get you on whenever we can. Have a great weekend, sir.
All right, no problem. You too.
You too. Brandon Marcello, good stuff on the House versus NCAA. Now that a lot of that information